I would like to welcome you all to Student Voices inside SCMA. My name is Lauren Shea Warner, and I am the Membership Engagement and Stewardship Coordinator at the museum. Today's program features Grayson Matula, class of 23, and Danielle Carrabino, Curator of Painting and Sculpture. Unfortunately, Curator Ya Wu is unable to join us this morning due to unforeseen events. Before I hand this over to our panelists, I just wanted to mention that we encourage you to type in the Q&A box throughout the presentation or via Facebook Live. And the Q&A box is on the screen here. And Grayson and Danielle will be following along, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. And I will now turn it over to Danielle.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I just wanted to introduce our student for the day who will take you on a guided tour of the Ancient Gallery. Grayson Matula joined us this fall as our Kennedy Fellow. We're very lucky to have her. And she and my colleague Ya Wu and I have been working together on a project to create a digital map that will eventually be displayed in our ancient gallery. And so we enlisted Grayson to help us with the research of certain objects that will be placed on a map, and she'll tell you a little bit more about this so that when you enter the gallery, you can have a little bit more in-depth knowledge of some of the objects and where they originated. I also wanted to echo Lauren that Yao Wu is very disappointed she couldn't join us, and I just would like you to try to make sure you keep her in mind throughout this presentation because she's very much part of this project. It's very much a collaboration, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So without further ado, Grayson is going to now take us on a tour. It's about 6 minutes of the Ancient Gallery, which was reinstalled in fall 2019. Yao and I were enlisted with the project to basically make our installation more global in scope. So before that time, most of our ancient collection was limited to the Western world, and now we've opened it up to all the cultures that are represented from the ancient world in our collection. So Grayson, I hand it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Lauren and Danielle, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Grayson, she, her pronouns. And just to say a bit more about myself first, I'm a current sophomore art history major and landscape studies minor at Smith. I'm originally from Austin, Texas, but moved back up to Northampton for the spring semester, where I'm currently living off campus with one of my Smith friends. But we're still participating in the testing program, so it's been really nice to be able to spend time around campus after being home for the fall. So I'll first just share a brief overview of what I've been working on for this year's Kennedy Fellowship Project, which, as Danielle mentioned, is a digital mapping project for the Ancient World Gallery on the second floor of the museum. And as a bit of background, my wonderful supervisors, Danielle and Yao, worked together to reinstall the gallery in the fall of 2019, as Danielle mentioned. So that was right when I was arriving at Smith as a first year, actually. And my project now is essentially an opportunity to interpret the new display of the gallery in a way that highlights these recent additions and the many cross-cultural connections that can be made between them, especially since the Ancient Gallery was limited to a much more Western scope, as was mentioned, prior to the reinstallation. So it's really significant that the display now encompasses North and South America, as well as Asia, and is able to showcase a much greater breadth of the museum's collection. So I've been focusing mostly on object research up until this point, and have been narrowing down a smaller but still representative selection of objects in the gallery to highlight on an interactive story map that I've recently started building with the assistance of the Spatial Analysis Lab. And once that's finished by the end of the semester, it will eventually be on display at the entrance of the gallery, as well as on the museum's website. And sort of the main idea with this is to provide greater context for visitors by highlighting some of the perhaps unexpected crossovers in material, iconography, function, etc., as well as using these examples to discuss some of the overarching challenges associating with displaying ancient art that we're working to be more transparent about, such as issues of provenance, authenticity, and the ethics of displaying burial objects. So obviously I've been working completely virtually this year, but just a few days ago, I was able to meet up with Yao in the gallery during Friday's visiting hours. And that was super exciting for me because it was my first time truly visiting the space. And Yao had shared a bunch of images of the gallery with me when we started. So I'd studied those and felt like I had a pretty solid understanding of the layout of everything, but there's definitely no replacement for being able to see the objects you've been studying up close and in relation to each other. So that was really special. And even though I know it's not the same through a screen, I filmed this short 6-minute video tour of the space while I was there. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and play that.
Hi everyone, today I'm in the Ancient World Gallery here in person for the first time, which is very exciting. So I'm just going to give a quick walkthrough of the space to give you a sense of its layout and the breadth of objects that we have in here as of the 2019 reinstallation.
So you enter the space at the end of the hall on the second floor, and throughout the center of the gallery we have several freestanding cases and pedestals which house mostly larger ceramic vessels as well as a few stone sculptures. There's a range of ancient cultures represented here, but most of these vessels function in pretty similar ways, typically storing food or liquid to either be consumed or offered to the dead. And just to zoom in on a few of them, this Neolithic Guan is a tall earthenware storage jar that's actually the oldest object in this gallery. It dates back to the mid-3rd millennium BCE and is of the Majiayao culture in the northwest region of China. It was created using a coil technique before being fired at a very high temperature, and these bold geometric motifs were quite typical among the pottery of the Majiayao culture, even though zoomorphic and more figurative natural motifs also would have been common. So to highlight the breadth of timescales here, over in this case we have 3 smaller vessels, which are some of the most recent additions in the gallery. We have a Peruvian terracotta vase, a Korean stoneware pedestal dish, and a dark clay Native American jar from the Mogyon culture, which dates between 200 and 1000 CE. And this Mogyon jar was gifted by Dr. Catherine Gable, who is an alumna as well as a past professor and much beloved dean of the School of Social Work at Smith. And in addition to this jar, she has generously gifted a larger collection of Southwest Native American objects to the museum, so her contributions have substantially expanded the museum's holdings in this area. So immediately to the right as you enter, we have a display of bronze Chinese currency, as well as silver and gold, Greek and Roman coins, and this area is likely where a monitor for the digital map will eventually be situated. And moving along, here we have a double-sided case dedicated to powerful and magical figures from a variety of cultures. So on this entry side, we have a Costa Rican kneeling man made of volcanic stone, a terracotta Nayarit woman carrying a bowl from Mexico, and a pair of Chinese tomb guardians. And coming over to the other side of the case, we have 2 female idols from Greece and several Egyptian shabti, which were these mummy-shaped figurines that were placed in tombs to substitute for the deceased. Now onto the rightmost center case, we have objects pertaining to the afterlife, which of course many of the objects in this gallery can straddle some of the different groupings, but here we have objects that were most intimately associated with the deceased body, such as this Imperial Roman cinerary urn, a fragment of Egyptian cartonnage, which was a protective cover for the mummified body, as well as a plaster mummy mask. And on the far left here, there's a display of jade artifacts found in ancient Chinese tomb furnishings, which jade is an extremely valued stone that's very difficult to carve and believed to preserve the body. So the cicada-shaped mouthpiece and eye covers were used to seal the deceased body, which you can see a subtle nod to this context in the faint outline of a face behind them. And these pigs and birds would have been held in the person's hands to offer wealth and protection into the afterlife. Here we have the leftmost center case, whose theme is daily life, and accordingly contains objects that were created with specific functions for daily use. For instance, these three circular objects are the backs of Chinese and Greek mirrors, the center of which has an outer band of characters, to transition to more examples of ancient writing systems below, with a cuneiform tablet from Babylonia and an Egyptian funerary cone with hieroglyphs. And then I really love this Mayan dish that also functioned as a musical instrument because the feet are filled with pellets that rattle when shaken. And sort of similarly over here to the far right, this Greek kylix, which is a drinking cup, had a bit of a dual function by acting as a mask with these prominent eyes to ward off evil when raised to the mouth. And it's displayed here in front of a mirror so you can see the gorgon that additionally appeared once the wine was emptied. This corner case explores the theme of luxury and ornament, so it contains a variety of precious materials, including more Chinese jades. We have pendants in the shapes of a human figure, a dragon, and a fish, as well as a perforated disc known as B. There are also gold Greek and Roman earrings, an Egyptian scarab, and a bronze Sino-Siberian belt plaque. Many of these items functioned as jewelry or decorative elements for clothing or furniture, so they would have been traded as luxury goods via major trade networks such as the Silk Road. Lastly, this is the Bravery and Vigor case, which contains figures that in some way exemplify courage and were used to assert often military power. And we've been looking at this case also to discuss issues of provenance and authenticity, because this Roman emperor bust, for instance, has been suspected for a while of being a 20th century reproduction. And so this is one thing we're hoping to bring more transparency to on the interactive map. And finally, we have a large mosaic personifying the river Pyramus that was excavated at the seaport of Antioch, a prominent city of the ancient Roman world. And it was actually a segment of a floor pavement, so at one point it was displayed on the floor in the museum, but it's now more prominently mounted on the wall over here by the window.
Thank you so much, Grayson. So I'd just like to kind of open up a discussion with you. It's so clear you've done an enormous amount of research and work, just so that the audience understands this is a pretty densely packed installation. There are a lot of objects from a lot of different cultures from around the world, and they're all fairly distinctive. So you've really kind of brilliantly managed to take this project and quickly join us and delving further into the research of these objects. So just to kind of get a sense of what you've learned so far and what you found enjoyable, but also what might have been the challenges so far in this project.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, honestly, all of it has been super enjoyable and such a great learning experience. But first of all, just learning more about the ancient gallery, both the specific objects as well as the reinstallation within the history of the museum, because again, I really wasn't too knowledgeable about the collection as a first year, and as a current student who didn't experience the gallery prior to the reinstallation, I think it's easy to take for granted that we have this range of objects on display, but now I really appreciate this effort to initiate a more global perspective and bring so many of these objects from diverse cultures onto display. And something that's been really interesting to think about is how the time span for what's considered ancient varies quite a bit by culture. As we saw in the gallery tour, the Neolithic Guan is from the 3rd millennium BC, whereas some of the pre-Columbian pottery examples are nearing 2000 CE. So things like that have just been really interesting. And then, yeah, also one of my favorite parts has been going through some of the archival documents, even though virtually, and reading handwritten letters and correspondences, especially from loving alumni donors, and finding old images has been a lot of fun. Yao very generously has been scanning object files that I'm interested in and sharing them with me, since I don't have access to the records room, so I really appreciate her taking the time to do that. But actually, I can share a few images that I've come across from the excavation of the Antioch floor segment mosaic. Let me just share that. Let's see. Okay, so obviously this is the current display, but then just as background, in the 1930s, a series of pretty significant excavations led by Princeton were undertaken to uncover the ruins of Antioch, which was a prosperous ancient Roman city founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals that eventually declined around the 6th century and became buried beneath the Orontes River. So this particular mosaic was discovered in 1937 at Antioch Seaport here. So these photos give a bit of context, and you can see that it was a section of a floor panel in the dining room of a private house and is made of marble and limestone tesserae. And our segment is a personification of the river Pyramus, but you can see here one of the other river personifications. I think that one was Tigris, but ours is the only one of the 4 corners that's still intact currently. And it did receive some conservation treatment in 2000, but it's still almost in perfect condition with only a few pieces missing. And so I'll stop my screen share. But just to say a bit more about this, because yeah, so Antioch was once the capital of the ancient Roman province of Syria, and also because the site is so close to the modern day border. For a while, there was some confusion as to the technical origin listed in the object file. So there is actually a letter to the museum from a Turkish embassy counselor in 1999 that was interesting to read, and basically pointed out that the museum's label stating Syria as the origin was incorrect. And he explained that the site is situated in Hatay, which has been a Turkish province in the south of modern Turkey since 1939, when it rejoined the country after a short period of being an independent state. So anyways, we were able to update the database to rectify that. And it's been really interesting to realize some of the geographical challenges like that come up when referring to ancient works in modern day, since geographical boundaries shift over time and there's often an imperfect alignment between historical and contemporary locations as well as time periods. And particularly with the Roman Empire, we've talked about how the database tends to always associate Roman culture with Italy and modern day Rome, for instance, but that's not often accurate given the span of the Roman Empire. And yeah, so just in this example, one last interesting aspect of that was the division and acquisition of the various segments, because in this case, half of the floor was lost to erosion, but in addition to the one at Smith, the other surviving fragments are now divided, I think, mostly among museums in Detroit and Norman, Oklahoma. So this division of mosaics over the course of an archaeological excavation can understandably be a very controversial practice and impacts future viewing and scholarship. So it's, yeah, there's just so much to think about with display choices and yeah, just so many aspects of provenance that have been really fascinating.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so just to kind of draw on that, as you can see, there's really so much that one could talk about just for a single object. I mean, the floor segment, the mosaic that you've done a lot of research on is one of those examples, but you could really say that for every object in the gallery. And so I think part of the impetus for a digital map is really to be able to share with our visitors you know, a little bit more about these objects where we simply don't have the space to kind of go into it in wall text. And so we're hoping that this digital map really will kind of cover those bases. And just to kind of talk a little bit more about that, this is a project that involves, you know, 2 curators, 1 fellow, 2 of our colleagues from the Spatial Analysis Lab, as you mentioned, who've been enormously helpful in helping us to kind of put all of this into some kind of you know, understandable digital form. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the collaborative process, which is usually to museums.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been so great for me, at least, to be able to draw from all of your expertise, both between you, Danielle, and Yao, having different specialties and levels of familiarity with the various objects. So you're able to offer great insight into my research for the label descriptions. And then I think the three of us were a bit technologically intimidated by the whole digital map aspect of the project, initially at least. So yeah, like you mentioned, we just met with Tracy and John from the SAL again recently, and they've been extremely instrumental in guiding us through our options and the logistics of how we can create what we're envisioning for this interactive display. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a really neat collaboration.
Great, thank you so much. So I think we have time for just one question if you have for me, and also Yao as well, I'll represent before we open it up to the floor.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'd love to hear you talk about just what you've learned in the process of having to make many of these difficult curatorial decisions about what to include and what to leave out of the reinstallation. And yeah, just speaking to what is gained and what is lost, especially in taking certain well-established objects off view.
Yeah, it's a very difficult but great question. This was definitely something that the museum thought is important to do, not only for the ancient gallery, but it's really the direction we're moving in for the rest of the museum, in the sense of kind of thinking more about what has been on view for a long time, and maybe what hasn't been on view, maybe some cultures that are less represented. You know, obviously we have things in storage. And so we really had to kind of make some hard choices. There are some things that people expect to be on view in the ancient gallery that we've taken down to make room for these other cultures. So we just felt like that was more of a priority to represent the ancient world, as it were. And to answer your question about how we chose them, we actually enlisted Barbara Kellum, the professor of ancient art, as well as Yanlong Guo and some other professors, Rebecca Warsham. We really relied on our experts on campus to help us, and we thought long and hard. It wasn't a quick decision, but what cultures we represented really was dictated by our collection. So we really just went through and tried to pull out everything that was ancient in our collection, and then tried to see if there were some things that resonated across cultures. So some themes like afterlife, for example, or daily life, you know, the utilitarian objects, or let's see, there's an area that has to do with kind of warlike themes. And so we tried to not just kind of highlight the differences, but also try to draw some continuity across time and space and culture, so that we can have a kind of more integral view of the ancient world. So hopefully that answers your question, but I do see that there are a lot of questions in the Q&A. So if it's okay, I'd like to open it up to the floor. And I think we've answered some of these already. So I'm just gonna skip to one of them that says, how difficult was it to come up with the themes of the installation? I'm going to take part of that, and then I'm going to pass it over to you, Grayson, because you've actually done the second part of that, which I think is almost more difficult. So the themes, as I said, we tried to come up with, you know, the way that objects were either similar in terms of their use or subject matter or material. And so we organized the gallery in groupings that way. But then for the digital map, Grayson, you have then taken other themes and kind of organized the objects. So if you'll share with us how you've done that.
Yeah, and I think that's been a fun, but also one of the more challenging aspects for sure, has been narrowing down a final selection of objects to highlight on the map, because we want to zoom in on that select few to make sure it's not overcrowded and is user-friendly, and that we can, you know, provide sufficient detail for each highlight, but it's still really important that there's a representative balance of timeframes, materials, cultures, locations in the gallery, and all of those factors to honor the collection's expansion especially. So yeah, I've gone through a few rounds of research and narrowing down which aspects of which objects I want to ultimately focus on, like, yeah, different material, kind of cross-cultural connections and provenance and things like that. So yeah, especially as someone who tends to be pretty indecisive and wants to delve into everything, it can be tough to be strategic about what I choose to highlight and what I choose to leave out for now. So yeah, as you touched on earlier, it's definitely given me an appreciation for your work as curators to select all of these objects from an even larger collection and decide how to configure them in relation to each other. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I would say curious, not indecisive. I think you're curious, which is a good.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
I'll take that.
Combine a few questions just so that we try to get through as many as possible. Is there a culture or time period that you feel is missing? And then this relates to a question that's a little later that came in about African works. And I'll just quickly say we do not have any African works that qualify as ancient. However, we recently reinstalled our African collection on the 3rd floor. So I'll just make a plug for that. But Grayson, is there anything you feel is missing from this installation?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what just came to mind for me, because of course we have Egypt, but Egypt is it's always been kind of grouped with the Greco-Roman work. So it was on display from the beginning. And yeah, we don't have any works from the rest of the African continent in the ancient gallery. So yeah, that's kind of what immediately jumped out to me. And then obviously the collection is still, you know, heavy on the Greco-Roman work, since that's what's been prioritized for so long. So yeah, even the representation that we do have, that's still more limited. So just, yeah, I mean, of course, there's always room for much more expansion, I think, in all of the geographical representations. So
definitely. One of the questions that came in from the audience is if you have a favorite object, and if you can speak to that a little bit.
Oh gosh, oh, that is hard. I do, let's see, I really do love the cicada jade tongue amulet. And I realized you couldn't really see the outline very well in the video actually, but if you go in the gallery, you can see a subtle outline of a face surrounding the tongue amulet and the eyes, since those, yeah, they would have been placed on the tongue and the eyes of the deceased person. And I think and it's just so great to see it in person. It's just so beautifully carved. And I love, there's a lot of cicada symbolism about resurrection. And yeah, it's a very important symbol to be used associated with the afterlife. And yeah, so I love that object. But there's so many that I'm fascinated by and that are just amazing to see in person. So
yes, and hopefully we'll all be back soon to be able to be in the galleries together. More on that to come. So there's a question about the Antioch Mosaic that you talked about, and one of our attendees would love to hear how it came to Smith. If you could talk a little bit more about that. You've done a lot of research, so
yes. Well, so yeah, it was. I actually, the research I've come across so far, I'm still investigating the specifics of how it got to Smith, because we did acquire it from Princeton, obviously from those excavations, but I actually, sorry, this is a like not a super detailed answer, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure how it came to Smith, but that's something that I'm like in the process of uncovering further. So it's interesting.
yeah. So just to fill in a little bit more there,
yeah,
back in the day when excavations were happening, it was pretty common for a bunch of institutions to kind of join forces and help with the excavation, and then take part of those excavation or what was excavated back to the country of, you know, where these institutions were based. So Smith was one of the lucky recipients of the the mosaic because of its involvement in kind of the research that was happening at the time here. But as you say, that the details are a little foggy. So
Right.
So just to kind of touch on that and kind of the origin of things, we didn't really talk much about provenance, and you did mention it, and it is something that we, Yao and I, were particularly aware of when installing the gallery. Ancient objects don't always come with a very clear provenance, and so we've done the best that we could in tracing these objects back. But what have you learned a little bit about provenance or kind of the history of some of these objects that you found interesting and problematic? Because we're definitely honest and transparent about the fact that it is challenging.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the really neat learning experiences has been doing some investigation into the objects whose dates are in question. And yeah, it's really interesting to see how thorny some of these issues are, which is definitely part of what makes ancient art so fascinating, because there's often very little known about the provenance, and a lot of time the maker or the time frame isn't going to be 100% definitive, and our understandings of the works are continuously evolving. So yeah, just as an example, there's one point where I was trying to sort through a bunch of files to identify where there had been a mix-up in the labeling of those two cuneiform tablets, trying to confirm that the one we have on view is indeed the messenger tablet, which is talking about sheep, kind of funnily, and as opposed to a similar contract tablet. And we ended up having to get some more assistance on that one because it got quite confusing, and we couldn't assume where exactly the mix-up had occurred. But and then yeah, also it's been interesting to think about the forgeries, because there are a few objects, most notably the Roman emperor bust that was alluded to in the video, which has been suspected for a while of being a reproduction. And we just got access to some new files pertaining to its provenance. So I need to finish looking through those, but I've spoken to Professor Barbara Kellum about it, and it's really interesting because there may still be a possibility that it is in fact from the 3rd century and was just sculpted by maybe a non-expert sculptor who is inconsistent with some of the conventions of that period. But yeah, we've talked about how a few of the other objects, it's possible that at least certain parts of them have been modified more recently than originally presumed. So overall, it's just shown me that there's a lot of ambiguity in ancient objects, and it's been really interesting.
Thank you so much. So I think we have one more question, and then I think we'll start to wrap things up. But one of our audience members would like to know from you, Grayson, what the biggest surprise was for you during your time working on the project. Did you discover some things that you didn't expect?
Ooh, let's see. Oh gosh, I'm gonna blank out on this now. But I think, I mean, yeah, I think in general, some of those forgeries, when I was walking through the gallery with Yao, and she was, pointing out some of the other objects, and she was like, oh, well, I just actually spoke to an expert the other day, and we're thinking that this part of this object actually is more recent. And, I had thought that object was pretty certain to be, a totally authentic from that time period. So just, yeah, I think just in general, just kind of seeing how much ambiguity there is, and there's so much that we're still learning about these objects each day. I think, yeah, was surprising to me in the beginning, at least.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll say Yao and I have actually also learned a lot from your work. So even after the installation went up, we continue to learn, and we continue to delve deeper into these objects. So it's been wonderful for us to have you to help us with this research and just keep it going. So so thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think actually we do have time for just a few more. So I'll just keep going and continue to ask questions, audience. But
Okay.
I think this one we already answered partially, but what types of objects do you think would contribute most to this installation? So we've already talked about the culture time period that's missing, but maybe the types of objects that are lacking, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, we do, I think, have a lot of vessels already, which I love the vessels. They're great. But yeah, I think maybe because we've been really interested in kind of zooming in on some of the funerary figures and looking at goddess worship. And I think there's definitely more room for those objects. Yeah, I would love to see that expanded, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's there's so many that I would love to see more of, but yeah, especially particularly the powerful and magical figures case. I think some more of that would be really interesting to explore.
Yeah, thank you. I think something that Yao and I learned also is that these ancient cultures weren't so different from our own. I mean, the earrings and some of the things we've seen are some of the vessels are very similar to things that we still have today. So it kind of brings us together.
Exactly.
Let's see. So since the objects come from all over the world, from different time periods, how does the exhibit create connections between them? And you can also speak about your work on the map in this context.
Yeah, so I think definitely your groupings in creating the installation, yeah, kind of what you were just talking about, strive to highlight, yeah, connections across the time periods, because the groupings are really surrounding function and kind of belief systems, but there's a range of times within them instead of it being, a chronological display. So yeah, I think that really lends well to to discovering similarities between disparate times and cultures. And so we're kind of echoing that in the digital map as well. And yeah, creating groupings where there's a breadth of time periods within each one. And yeah, so like on the map, we're playing with kind of this animated feature where the different time periods will pop up at different times and highlight the different objects. So yeah, we like to, again, just highlight a breadth of time periods, so it's not just concentrated on any given period at once.
Yeah, thanks. So this relates a little bit to what you were just talking about with the animated part, but the question is, will the map be interactive? And the person follows up with, this is probably something that will be less a part of museums post-pandemic, true. But yes, consider an interactive map, but I'll let you, Grayson, speak to that.
Yeah, so definitely the interactive component was a big goal going in, but kind of immediately, yeah, we had the concern of, oh, well, in a pandemic museum world, we're not really going to want to have touch screens and everything. So we kind of immediately started planning for slightly different iterations of the map in the museum and then on the website. So kind of the current plan is to have an animated video loop of the map on display in the gallery. So it won't be touch screen. You can't really interact in that way in person, but it'll show kind of a video loop of the interactive process. And then on the website, the hope is that will be much more interactive and you can, really explore it yourself and be clicking on the different pop-ups and tabs and scrolling through it. So that's kind of the hope and the thought right now.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. So again, just to make a plug for coming to see the objects in person when we're reopen again, there's nothing like the real thing, but as Grayson said, we will be putting part of this up on our website. And so hopefully this will also draw audiences that are a little kind of, far ranging. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much. And thank you for your continued hard work. And we look forward to the finished product. And we look forward to welcoming all of you back to the galleries as soon as we can. And with that, I will say thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Grayson. Thank you, Yao. And thanks to my colleagues. I'm going to pass it back over to Lauren.
Yes, thank you so much.
So thank you all for attending, and thank you Grayson and Danielle for the beautiful presentation, and Louise Krieger for the assistance behind the scenes. We have a number of programs coming up later next month, including the third part of the series, Student Voices inside SCMA on April 14th and Open Eyes on April 22nd. You may register on our website, which is scma.smith.edu. Stay tuned for some sneak previews on our social media or sign up to receive email communications on our website for more information about this and other museum happenings. Finally, I wanted to thank our fabulous members and donors who makes a program like this possible. If you are not a member or have questions about membership, please go to our website for more information. We hope to see you soon. Have a wonderful day.